Hello and welcome to A Plan for That, a space for progressives to stretch their minds and unpack contemporary politics from inside and outside establishment parties. I'm Vince, a progressive political activist who works on the fringes of the establishment in the Rocky Mountain West, a recovering journalist. I'm here to put my experiences working in the legislative process to help anyone with the energy to get the job done and continue this fight after November's election. I am joined, as I am every week, by Erin.
Hey everyone, I am Erin. I am a recently activated lightning bolt of energy that demands progressive change in America, and I will not give up until we get it. And hey, let's bring the crowd, okay? They're coming along with me.
It's going to be very hard to have an entire army of progressives if we don't build a crowd around us while we do this, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so I want to start by unpacking the weekend a little bit. It was a wild weekend here in Denver. It was off the heels of a holiday weekend, and everybody was starting to get back into the rhythm of showing up to things. There were a couple of actions that I went to, some really wonderful rallies for students in Adams County and in the northern part of the Front Range of Colorado, and it's just been busy, but I also missed a lot of the news, which meant that by the time I got to it, it had already bouldered and avalanched and snowballed out of control. And the three big stories from over the weekend, and I'm going to let Erin choose from the roulette, were the shootings of two LA County Sheriff's deputies, forced hysterectomies at ICE facilities, which is vile, and of course the hashtag Save the Children. What the heck is going on with that? Erin, where do you feel like starting?
We usually have a phone call to check in and just kind of see what we want to do for the show, and we have a great time chatting while doing it. This phone call was therapy. It was much needed therapy. I don't think I'm alone in this. There are going to be times, guys, where you just feel like the mountain is too high and you just feel like the news is too awful. And I want you to give yourself permission to feel that, because it is really hard to take and it is really a lot that's going on. And then what I did, per Vince's instruction, he's such a good friend, I just kind of looked at it all from the outside, like, wow, okay, that was a lot that we just said, that was a lot that we just read. Now let's go forward with our agenda. And our agenda is bringing change. And if that's just one tiny thing that you do each day, then great. However, getting to the story that really just gutted me, Vince, was the forced hysterectomies that are allegedly happening at the ICE facilities where immigrants are being detained. And honestly, folks, let's just say what it is. They're being treated like prisoners. They're not detainees. They're being treated like criminals. And I'm disgusted. And I went off on social media probably for the entire night last night. And I am actually a little pleasantly surprised when I called my members of Congress today. Joe and Vince, they were slammed. They were getting phone calls from everybody. It was all about the same topic. So good on you, America. I'm really glad that you care, because these are some really frightening allegations.
They really are. And I couldn't. I'm calling this genocide, because international governing bodies have all agreed that forcing women to abort unborn fetuses or to remove their uteruses and not be able to reproduce at all is widely recognized as a form of genocide around the world, and our country is currently engaged in it, everybody. I was grateful for our phone call on Sunday night. We do touch base every Sunday night, and I tweeted out that we should have just released it as an episode, because for hours we circled and we analyzed and we talked and we unpacked together, and we were slowly moving out of the dirt and more up to that wonderful, heavenly view that I really like to have, that 5,000 foot out view where you can see it all kind of mixing together. And we were overwhelmed by both the horrendous stories and allegations out of the Georgia ICE facility, but also, trying to keep up with what was true and what wasn't out of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Deputy shooters. And it brought us into the Save the Children conversation in a real way. And that's really what led to the overall structure of how we wanted to build today's show. Was this is overwhelming. And we know kind of what happened. Erin and I are not journalists. We are not independently reporting this. And I really encourage you to go read factual, ethically supported journalists' accounts on what's happening right now for your actual information. Because this is so convoluted that it's almost the more important conversation to have around it is, how do these stories get this wildly out of control, this divisive, and this partisan so quickly?
Yes, and I'm gonna just weigh in here on even a show that kind of gives a little insight into how quickly and how awful this spreads, just like a virus. I don't know if anyone out there watches Homeland, but my husband and I have been watching it, and it's very engaging. It's fun, but lately it's topical, kind of frighteningly so. Kind of like they were, I don't know, reading the future when they designed what their episodes were going to be. And the current episode talks about how the people in government, I will leave names off for now, but we may call you out later. People in government are amplifying stories that are literally coming from Russian troll farms and bot nets to amplify the story. And I will claim to be a victim because there are children who were put into cages. There are children who were ripped from their family. And so it seemed natural to me to write the hashtag save the children, right? Vince?
That's how they get you every single time. They want you to feel like you are absolutely doing the right thing, and they'll introduce it with even factually real data that then slowly gets distorted and drawn out, and lies introduced into it, and months later you're accidentally down a conspiracy rabbit hole. It's not great. And to be totally honest, I'm a communications professional, and I understand how they kind of spiral, but I needed a little bit of help really wrapping my head around it. And I'm really grateful. I'm going to kind of buck the template that we've already built over the first few episodes. And we're going to go to a wonderful political ad, everybody. So don't worry, you're going to hear from a candidate first. But I want to bring on our guest a little bit earlier in the show this week than normal, because we're talking to Joe Spalding, who's going to have a full bio in the second act, but he's a digital communications and expert. He's a digital communications and political expert, and he helped me on a phone call last week really understand just the simple 1-2 steps that both perpetrators in spinning conspiracy can take to make it bigger, but also some of the smaller steps that we can take on the other side to help bring it back down and silence the misinformation a little bit. Would you mind if we went to a break and brought our guest in?
I'm ready when you are.
All right, everybody, hold on tight or hit that fast forward 30 seconds button twice, and we'll see you right here.
Too often, human beings create systems that alienate the worker from the very thing that they're producing. So that's what exploitation looks like, whether it's slavery, whether it's the inability to organize and have fair wages, whether it's the lack of equal pay for equal work, gender discrimination. All of these are ways in which human beings become self-alienated and disconnected from the work that they are producing, which causes frustration and resentment. But if there's a way in which you can be one with the work that you're doing, you don't mind working hard because you're connected to it. Because in some sense it belongs to you rather than you belonging to somebody else. And so that's what I mean by the dignity of work.
I'm Raphael Warnock, and I'll always work for you. That's why I approve this message.
And we're back, and it is so exciting to be able to say that people have already reached out to us and requested that we play their ads on our show, Erin. Isn't that kind of cool?
Absolutely. And I am so happy that this week we're going to be giving a shout out to Pat Timmons Goodson, who is running an NC08, as well as Reverend Raphael Warnock for Senate in Special Election, Georgia.
Oh, special elections, Georgia. There's going to be an entire show someday for that but that is not today. Today, we are talking gerrymandering, conspiracy, crisis communication, and just how you can get involved even if you don't think you can. And we're talking about it with Joe Spalding. Joe has a strong history of work on statewide ballot initiatives across the United States, and we are fortunate that he is here talking to us today. He specializes not only in volunteer recruitment and management, but also digital communications and data and analytic. He has worked on statewide campaigns in California and Idaho and has broken records, and you're like, oh my gosh, wait, we'll get into it. But when you hear about what he has done in Michigan, wow. Joe, welcome to A Plan for That.
Thank you, Vince. It's great to be here.
We've had guests come at us from Oregon, Georgia. We have Ohio joining the show soon. You and I started talking mainly about Michigan, but for the sake of our audience, where are we talking to you from today?
Today I'm at my apartment, and that's in Oakland, California, and I moved out here after my last campaign in Michigan, which ended in 2018, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that. But a lot of the digital strategists, a lot of the campaign folks do get around the country quite a bit. So.
When you and I started talking on Twitter, and then it spilled over into the 3D world surprisingly quickly, it was really about exactly what we were talking, what Erin and I had started talking at the top of the show about, which is spinning conspiracy and how bad actor and bad faith politicians and campaigns can use that can legitimize it to help push forward their own political agenda. And you had a really interesting Michigan example of what was happening, which is how I got dragged into it. It's COVID related, and as everything these days seems to be, but I would love to be able to ask you to give us a little bit of background on what's going on with COVID conspiracy in Michigan right now, just as a starting place.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some pretty concrete moments that a lot of people will already be familiar with, especially if they're plugged into the conversation online. And you're looking back in last spring because Michigan had some of the most robust protections for coronavirus. It also had some of the first pushback, and it already had an existing militia movement and a pretty strong anti-vax movement. So all these elements kind of come together, and then you'll see videos of anti-coronavirus protection activists getting dragged kicking and screaming out of restricted areas in the Michigan State Capitol. And then the next couple days later, you'll see video of, and there's all sorts of pictures all over the internet now, of armed militiamen actually breaking into the Michigan Capitol in order to essentially hold the entire government hostage for that day. And the thing is that these aren't normal events. Everybody knows that, and they definitely don't happen in a vacuum. The scary part is a lot of this is elevated by elected officials, or it's one step away as far as I'm concerned. The political hacks that they pay to go and push their message, and it's a constant barrage on Twitter. So you'll see in Michigan, Republican consultants like Stu Sandler and Tory Sachs, who also run their own political action committees, tweeting, multiple times a day about the exact same issue with just like small variations. And the hope is that one of these gets picked up by one of the more slightly fringe, but still moderately mainstream right-leaning news outlets. And every time, the story starts out as, wild conspiracy theory, and then Tory and Stu will massage it and make it so it's a little bit more believable, gets picked up by the more traditional press, and soon it's across the media, and then it's getting reported nationally. It's a bit more sanitized, but you're still seeing things like, the concrete example, and we go back to the Save the Children, Save Our Children, Q hashtag, and we're looking at, concentrated and coordinated effort across like Sinclair Broadcasting to amplify work that the U.S. Marshals are doing, that they should be doing anyway. They should be rescuing missing kids, but amplified in the language of these conspiracy theories, by saying things that, a child in a parental custody dispute gets counted along with the rare event of an actual kidnapping, which, on average is about, if you talk to experts in that field, probably around 115 kids get kidnapped by strangers every year in America, and that's tragic. But that doesn't correspond with what you're seeing every day. And it's not like if you watch the news in Grand Rapids, you're seeing about activity about the U.S. Marshals in Kent County, Michigan, where Grand Rapids is. You're seeing news about the U.S. Marshals doing this type of stuff in Indiana and in Texas and in Utah. So you can tell that there's some sort of coordination there in terms of bringing that at the forefront. And then meanwhile, these are just kind of like, silent reminders to the people that actually believe these absolutely insane conspiracy theories that go as far as thinking that, Tom Hanks is drinking babies so he can appear young enough to be in movies.
I liked you're calling them anti-coronavirus protection activists. I like that. I liked that label. I caught that kind of slip by, and I actually wrote it down because I was like, that's exactly the brand and the label that I would want to see applied to their movement.
They really are anti-coronavirus activists, protection activists, and it's really important that we use the word protection when we're talking about this, because the language of both the militia and the political language is charged with the rhetoric of freedom. And the other side really wants this to be like seen as like some sort of serious, like wearing a mask is some sort of draconian, not an ask but a tell. And the government, big bad governor, is going to come in and make you wear a piece of cloth on your face. And where's the real loss of freedom? The real loss of freedom, actually, we all know, is sitting in a hospital bed, dying of COVID, choking on your own lungs. But that doesn't get talked about well enough, because a lot of folks, in terms of messaging, and this is the fault of the left, are not the greatest about entering those discussions in terms of freedom.
One of the reasons I'm looking forward to asking you about this is because of how well versed you are. And I can hear that you have a wealth of experience behind you, not just in activism, but also in kind of decoding the disinformation campaigns that are flying around like a hurricane on social media. To that effect, I'm wondering what you think of our stochastic terrorist president, who actually is calling on these people to show up armed and dangerous in state houses all across the country, not just Michigan, but certainly that was one of the worst. I just worry that there's an army of slightly imbalanced, I don't even know what to call them at this point, cultists, really, that are just following whatever it is that they hear from the highest office in the land.
Yeah, no, and that's absolutely terrifying. And there's a lot of directions that can go. One of my old bosses on a campaign a long time ago used to say, the analogy is, keep your eye on the entire board. And in this specific discussion, I think that's super important, because when you come to Trump, saying liberate Minnesota and liberate Michigan, all caps, multiple exclamation points in these tweets, the important thing to remember is that that's an automatic tell that he's not being genuine when he's saying that he was concerned about causing panic back in March when he was botching the coronavirus response and doing the actions that resulted in the 196,000 people that are currently dead in this country because of that. So I think that when it comes to Trump doing that, I think that was predictable of him. I think that I don't know if I'd say it was good strategy, but it might have been the only strategy that he had. But anybody who is watching his progression towards actual real, Nazi-style fascism, these are all predictable steps. And I mean, to bring that full circle to the forced hysterectomies discussion, especially when it comes to leftist activists who work predominantly in the Latino communities, I can tell you that the attitude is a lot like the Dave Chappelle sketch on Saturday Night Live after Trump got elected. And it's, we were here telling you all that this is where this is heading, because we're watching the kids get locked in the borders and essentially getting purposely infected with coronavirus. And there's no other way to interpret that, knowing what we know about the virus, and then especially knowing what Trump knew, and he knew back not just in March, but in January and December, and maybe even in last November. So
it really is just time for this narrative of incompetence to go away. It's not incompetence. I've been screaming it on Twitter for long enough to people back in March thought I was crazy, and now they're coming up to me and saying, oh my God, you were right. He really is killing us on purpose. He really is spreading this as far as it possibly can go. And every decision he's made at every single turn during the crisis literally makes it worse. What do you think, Vince?
I have a confession to make, actually. This revelation that that Trump knew about COVID, and then on top of that, before I even get into my confession, I want to mention or build off of what Joe said about people years ago who were standing there and were like, we were been trying to tell you this, and that this was the natural outcome of it. And the first thing that I thought of when I saw the ICE story break was all of the hours that I have spent outside of days, weeks outside of Senator Cory Gardner's office here in Colorado, as well as the GEO facility that is a private prison that is leased by ICE here in Colorado to hold these people in. And just how much like we were screaming back then to let people out, and nobody listened, and now everybody's hands in the air thinking, what could we have possibly done? And boy, is that super frustrating. But that leads to my confession, in that sometimes it takes being hit over the head hard with the truth to really be able to see it. And that argument of whether or not Trump is competent or incompetent or evil, or if he's doing this on purpose, or if he just doesn't know what he's doing, I was willing to entertain that conversation right up until the COVID confession came out, because you know what? That right there means that it just shows what so many other people Aaron, had known for months and for years, was that he wasn't incompetent. He really is just evil, and any benefit of the doubt for this man or for his administration or his party at this point is just beyond the pale.
I think that this is something that I brush up against in a broader context a lot, because I do, and Vince and I had talked about this a little bit, but when we get into the gerrymandering discussion, I have a counterpart in that story, and Katie is a lot more. I think of her as being a lot more inspiring than I am. I see evil in the world, and I have to attack it in the best ways that I know how, and then I go and find better ways if I'm not successful.
I have so much respect for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's somebody's I guess got to do it, and maybe I was just too into comic books growing up, and I don't know if that's a thing that can actually happen. I don't know. Folks needing to essentially get their bell rung is a thing that's just part of human nature too, in order to really see what's going on. When we have this analogy that's completely a dead horse that's been beaten, it's wake up or get woke or whatever, and it gets used a lot on the left, and it gets used a lot on the right by the crazy conspiracy theorists, and sometimes they'll throw in the Matrix analogies in there too. But it's I mean, that is something that's fundamental about human nature, and that's across the board. So I do types of things in mind when we're messaging politically for people.
Does anybody recall the phrase alternative facts? I mean, we made a big deal out of that 2.5, 3 years ago, but now we've just been living in a world of alternative facts, and we've unfortunately accepted it as our reality. We've accepted that there is a reality where politicians can define 3 different versions of the truth depending on where you land on an ideological spectrum. And that's, trash. That's absolute garbage inside of itself. And so how to move out from that, and how to move beyond it, and more importantly, recognize when you're being digitally gaslit and when conspiracy is really starting to drive you home. Joe alluded to where it starts with the 2 people in Michigan who like to take to Twitter and perpetuate conspiracy, and he like, you're not here, Joe, and you very deliberately pointed out that the way that they do it is they intentionally send out the same message with slightly different variants in the verbiage over and over and over. And I remember when I was a journalist, and I first started seeing this on campaign and candidate and on political Twitter, where every day around the same time, or every hour for a day, a very similar message would go out. And it took me a long time to realize that they really were just RT baiting, and they were looking for the one that had just the right spin on it to just blow out of control.
I have a question on that, you guys, just before we get to the gerrymandering, which I'm totally excited to do, but there's always so much to talk about, especially now that we have someone who, can I say this, Joe, is kind of a hero to me, because I think you do need to see where the evil is in the world and then bring the light and the joy and fight it off. I want to be you and Katie combined. How's that? What I want to bring up is something that I think only the very top kind of counterintelligence and counterterrorism experts are talking about fluidly, and the rest of us, myself included, just kind of got a real eye-opener on this. I really love that Vince brought us all back to alternative fact hell, because it is actually important to be here, and here's why. Part of the mission of the Kremlin, and this is an acknowledged fact, part of the mission is to get people so confused and so just inundated in non-truth and non fact that there is this kind of, I think Stephen Colbert actually said it best, post-truth society that breaks out, where you can actually have a ridiculous conversation with someone who refuses to see facts. And there was a meme of this actually on social media, and I can't think of how better to describe how dangerous this is than to share the meme with you. It was basically person A says 2 + 2 is 4. Person B says, how do you know that? Person A says it's a provable fact. Person B says, but who told you it was a fact? And so on and so forth. And until you just argue yourself into a circle. And all you literally have to do, as you very well know, listeners, is take 4 objects, line them up. And if you take 2 away, there's still 2. It is a fact. But these things are so dangerous, Joe. And I think that you know that there's a dark kind of theme behind this. And so what I really want to ask of you guys who have been certainly more awakened for longer than I have is, when did you first start seeing what you're talking about right now? Because I think that's going to be real important for people to know.
So, I mean, I think the critical, crazy postmodern French text here is, simulacrum simulation. It's Baudrillard, and it's about, we got to remember that none of these bad actors in the campaign world are doing anything original, right? They're doing their best to mimic other things that have been successful. And so for me, the advent of, computers outside of gerrymandering, really, but the advent of computers having an impact on the messaging side of things in campaigns or in political life goes back to 2004, and we're just exiting the last major, I call them 1968 style protest, which is the WTO protest. Some of that made it online, but when we go to 2004, we're looking at the RNC protest in New York City, and the folks there, the actors on the ground, were using the precursor to Twitter. It's called Text Mob. You can look this up, TXTMOB. And, it's just a subscription service. It might as well have been a newsletter, but anybody who texted the one phone number that was signed up for the service would get the text that everybody sent up. And it was a great way, the activists used it to coordinate liberating critical mass riders that were getting kettled by the NYPD with snow fence. So for me, that's kind of like the first semblance. And then you see this really come to fruition in 2009 in the Iranian Revolution, where Twitter was used widely to get news back out here. And one of the weird things there was that that's one of the first moments outside of the fight against Scientology or just pure trolling that you see Anonymous make any type of political motion in anywhere. And they're staunchly on the anti-Ahmadinejad side of the Green Revolution. And I don't really know how close they were to succeeding, but I do know that their tactics were so successful that they get mimicked in the Arab Spring. And by the time Tunisia's government flips, and it looks like Egypt's government's about to flip, you start seeing like Hosni Mubarak do things like turn off Twitter. So you start seeing the legitimate side first, but then you see after that, you start seeing it get weaponized at an incredible level. And part of that is just, the advent of machine learning and AI and the ability for people to use really, really powerful computers to help sort out and target, and then all the data sets that are driving all this, and that's all terrifying in its own right. So for me, it's always a success. It's always good stuff first, and then it gets mimicked. And so, and I mean, that's also my biggest fear about what we did in Michigan is, and I've seen very similar attempts at doing this, is taking what we learned there, and if there aren't active forces on the ground, grassroots in every state pushing forward for democracy, what if the tactics we use, Michel Foucault, the other postmodern French guy that I like, he says power isn't good or bad, it's dangerous. So, what happens when that dangerous weapon lands on the side of the folks that want to increase the amount of fascism? And we are seeing some of that in Michigan. Those forces we talked about there, along with a lot of interesting DeVos-funded networks of nonprofits across especially West Michigan, have been trying to, pass a petition, have it circulated, and limit the governor's power to protect people from coronavirus.
Gross. The mutation of good ideas and of good platforms, and I agree. Like, that's what happens if somebody comes up with a really great idea, and it's usually idealistic, and in a utopic world where everybody has a good heart, it really will do a lot of good. But then we don't live in a perfect world, and one or two people with bad hearts can really rock something off of the rails. I'm going to do it real quick. I had a similar timeline to Joe's, with one notable, I'm assuming a difference. I don't know this for sure. But in 2004, I was starting high school. And so I was also a digital native person who was on the internet and watching organizers and politics move onto the internet with us. At the time, I was already protesting, and I was out in the streets. It was WTO, it was the Iraq War beginning and the Afghanistan War beginning, a lot of W stuff. But it was fascinating to watch how organizers were building. And at that time, I actually got pulled into this is always weird to say, especially on a microphone, but I got pulled into 4chan because it was like later on as it was building, and I was on that side of the internet as the Arab Spring, and as we were starting to see how you could really weaponize social media and internet.coms over and behind movements in the real world, but I mean, it was just such a natural part of my life that I don't think that I noticed how dangerous it could really be until 2015, 2016, when I was covering the Trump primary, and I was just watching how they were doing their digital advertising, and I just never seen anything like it before. And my digital native brain was just like, this is going to change everything. And I underestimated at the time how much it would change, because we're in a whole new world now. Or we have to recognize that we're in that new world now.
Well, and I think you brought up an interesting point. And Joe, I don't know about you, but I kind of already want you back for another episode that's all about how we actually really do need to regulate these big tech companies so that they can't just say, whoops, I allowed a foreign country to attack democracy. Sorry.
That's absolutely right. And I think that, it comes to these tech companies, I think getting it right is almost more important than not getting it wrong, although not getting it wrong has proven to be deadly lately. But, I say this all the time when people bring up Facebook, is I absolutely understand everything that's terrible about the platform, and it horrifies me. The other side of the coin is we absolutely could not have ended gerrymandering without the platform the way that it existed at the time that it did.
And that's a perfect point to kick over to how you ended gerrymandering too, because I feel like we've set the terrified tone, and now is a good time to start telling people how we can build out of it, and how we can build a plan for that, and how we can put some actionable steps forward, and putting an end to gerrymandering. Congratulations, by the way, in Michigan is an incredible first step in that. So everybody go watch Slay the Dragon. We'll start there. That's the movie that we're going to be referencing once or twice here. I talked about it on Twitter while I was watching it, and as a local elections activist, I found myself crying. I found myself screaming at the TV. I was cheering, and at the end of it, I finished watching it at like 11 o'clock at night here in Colorado, and I was going to run through my window to go start organizing a city council race that we're already talking about, because it is so possible for anybody to make a difference, and y'all proved that in Michigan. For our listeners who haven't watched the movie yet, though, what happened in Michigan, Joe?
So, I mean, I only know it from my perspective, and I don't, I love the movie so much, and it's wholly accurate. But from my perspective, what happened in Michigan was, and for me, it starts in Missouri in 2012, but only briefly. I was working on the McCaskill campaign there, and that was my first campaign where I really learned how to pitch volunteer recruitment, where I learned how to make the hard ask over and over again, make sure people come in and knock the doors in order to win. Because to me, at the time, my mom had cancer, and if Claire McCaskill didn't get reelected, ACA gets overturned, my dad loses his job, and maybe my parents have to choose between my mom living or losing the house. It was so real to me, and it was life or death. So I'm in there making 300, 500 dials a day, and that's what was expected. And so I fit right in. I loved it. That crew kind of went around, did some other campaigns. One of the campaigns they did was Gary Peters in Michigan for Senate in 2014. And so, I enter 2016 thinking, not only is all the polling there, Michigan's locked, but, the people there, they know how to knock doors because that same crew went in there and it was going to be great. And, obviously we were all there on election day, see this horse show, and the vote comes in. And then we hear a couple weeks later, the story about the bus getting turned around in Iowa, and they're not going to go knock doors there. And I'm hearing horror stories internally of stacks of door knocking packets and phone banking packets with filled in data that were not getting entered at all. And I mean, I don't know the internal workings of that campaign. I don't know what was in the chain of command between Brooklyn and Michigan, but I do know that I trust the people that I work with that told me that things were not right in 2016. And I didn't know that till it was too late. I was crushed. So I'm looking for some place to put that energy. Meanwhile, I do see, this woman that I sat next to in college, who was always very, very chipper, make this Facebook post about wanting to end gerrymandering. I see her kind of build some momentum, and I see them stumble, and a little bit. The early stumble I remember is and it's still called this, but the first Facebook group they made to organize is called Michiganders for Nonpartisan Redistricting Reform, or something extremely hard to say like that. But then I see them change that up, and then suddenly they're voters, not politicians. And then sometime in April, I get a call from a college professor who asked me, Joe, have you seen what Katie's been doing? She's trying to end gerrymandering. I'm like, yeah. What's that got to do with me? And my professor, Molly Patterson, who's like my favorite professor of all time, sorry, all my other professors, she said that, so they've gotten some lawyers and they've gotten some language together, but they have no idea how to get all this ink on paper, and it looks like an insurmountable task. And the person they had in charge of building their field program bailed before they built a single spreadsheet.
Oh, so you're coming into a totally brand new environment. A lot of people who have been doing it for just the sake, they believe in this. They want to save their state. They want to save democracy, and it's been true, real grassroots organizing up to that point. And so did you swoop? Was there a cape?
I don't know. It was more. I guess Batman has a cape. It was more in the shadows type stuff. I go to this meeting in Holland, my hometown, which is also Betsy DeVos's hometown, and I go to this meeting at the library, and Katie's there speaking, and I hadn't seen her since college, but the room is full of these 45 to 65-year-old, mostly women, and to me, in my head, I'm like, these are the women that knocked like 2 million doors for Claire McCaskill in 2012. And they're here. It's not even a real election year right now. It's 2017. What is this all about? And I thought, well, if she has enough of these little old ladies, they're going to be able to do this. It's just math. So I asked Katie how many volunteers she had on her list, and she's like 5,000. And I'm like, I mean, we can get 450,000 signatures. That's something that I could do just knowing the math from the previous field programs that I was in. And she's just like, well, we absolutely need you. I'm like, well, this is a rapid play of a conversation that took about 2 days. But I was telling her that, well, you can't afford me. You can't afford to print your petitions yet. But I do know that once we hand in these signatures, everybody in the universe is going to want to be giving us cash, because we'll prove just what volunteers can do. And so we did that. We built a communication structure. We empowered one of the volunteers, Jamie Linezetti, was director of the field program, and I was essentially, behind the scenes training Jamie and training Katie, and then, I would be always the person that stepped up and would spit out all the data and all the weekly calls, and the one that would, lay out the doomsday scenario and say, hey, we don't have enough signatures early enough. We're all going to be out there marching the snow. Ink freezes. It's not going to be possible to get it done. We don't want to give them any more time to prepare at the end. All these things, and and we treated our volunteers like they were staff because they demonstrated that they had that level of input, that level of buy-in, and it couldn't have gone better. And for those of us who have done field, and I know this is impressive to Vince, but I can promise the people that haven't that this is super impressive. 400, and he can confirm, but 440,000 signatures in 110 days. We're averaging 4,000 signatures every single day. We had one volunteer, Susan Skidmore, bless her heart. She's a New Yorker. She talks faster than me. She had an average of over one signature an hour for the entire time we were in the field. She was our biggest earner. At the fastest, we were getting a signature every 12 seconds, including when we were asleep. That's just the average out. The validity rate for those signatures was 86% across the board. And this is the crazy thing. We did something no one tried before, and we built an in-house proprietary database, and we trained all these volunteers, which were not internet native folks. They're people that had to learn how to type in their 50s and 60s. And these folks got trained on this database system, and the database compliance rate was 99.96%. So that means that fewer than 4,000 signatures out of 440,000 signatures were on paper, but not in the database. It's absolutely, literally stuff you could never, ever pay for, those numbers.
That's incredible. I'm in awe, I'm inspired, and I kind of want you to tell us, where we can send money, but I also want you to tell us how we can echo this movement like popcorn all over the nation.
Yeah, and I mean, the quick 30, keep it at 30,000 feet, Michigan is lucky. It's one of the few states that allows ballot initiatives, and we got Colorado, we got Utah, Oregon, and in California, and these are all, a lot of these states are passing pretty progressive laws anyway, not Utah, but, we have the ability to build ballot initiatives there. Now, one of the really fascinating case studies is Idaho, and this is, to me, the mirror image of what we did in Michigan in the same year. We had Luke Mayville, a professor up north in Idaho, who pretty much ran a ballot initiative. Now, they didn't get all their signatures of volunteers. I think they paid for like 4% or something. But they expanded Medicaid there, and it stuck. And because of them, something like 40,000 people have healthcare that didn't have healthcare 2 years ago. But the reason that I think that mirrors so much what we did in Michigan is because to this day, Reclaim Idaho and Voters Not Politicians are existing organizations. They're still active doing things. Reclaim Idaho has done some significant lobbying on education. They probably preserved an average of about $6,500 in funding per teacher in Idaho just this past week. And then Voters Not Politician is holding the line when it comes to vote by mail and holding the Michigan State Legislature accountable for passing things. And they just had a success in the Senate. We're hoping for a success in the House to allow votes to be counted the day before the election, the mail-in votes, the day before the election, start counting those. So the good news is once we get one of these movements started in a state, it can keep going. Now, there's two bad news parts, and one of them is only kind of bad news. I don't think it's bad news as a field person, and that's that it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot more creativity where there is not a ballot initiative option, because you don't get that rally the state around a nonpartisan issue feeling that's so necessary to make these movements work. No, Voters Not Politicians get started because Katie Fahey made a Facebook post. It's very much the same thing, except for the Republicans in a billion million tweets haven't been able to trap the lightning in the bottle like she did, because they're not authentic. And I think that's kind of super important, is just getting that authenticity. Kind of throw the last little bow on that. That's exactly what Stephen Colbert's.
Yeah, I mean, it's the old metaphor that astroturf is never going to be the same as actual grassroots. Absolutely. And I have to say, Erin is not the only one who is inspired by these efforts because, we're all just people. We're all just trying our hardest. And I have to, it is so cool that voters, not politicians, not only came out of a Facebook post, but is still here, is still fighting fights, has expanded their coalition, has found a way to continue their message and to continue their presence on the ground. Like it just shows that when we're building a plan and when we're building actionable steps, it can continue, it continues, it can be rolled out, it can be reapplied, and we're not necessarily just building for one thing one time right now.
This is for activists to know, and this is the CYA portion of this, right? And this was integral to the strategy for what we accomplished in Michigan. And this was probably the most difficult pitch I've ever given in my life that succeeded. And that was when I started on board, because they only had $50,000 in the coffers. And then they had the list of 5,000. The big players, and if you're from Michigan, you know who they are, on the nonprofit side, and these are great, fantastic organizations, do a whole heck of a lot of good work, but they also saw gerrymandering, quite frankly, as their turf. They were leaning on the board of directors who were complete political neophytes. They never done anything political before, really. College professors. They were leaning on them very hard to hand over the keys of the kingdom, essentially directly to the nonprofit industrial complex. And these are the same organizations that, maybe they've had a lot of good traction with lawsuits, but they have not been successful on ballot initiatives. And the thing that I told Katie was, if you can tell me one ballot initiative in the last 10 years that they were on the right side of pushing for that passed, or one that they were against that failed, I'll more than happy back off and figure out how we can transfer everything over to them. She's like, no, Joe, you're absolutely right. And I'm like, she asked me, aren't you afraid that they're not going to be your friends after this? And I'm like, well, think about the world in which we hand 440,000 signatures into the state of Michigan. We're on the ballot, and then we go to the traditional nonprofits in the state. There's not very many routes they can take. They can't snub us then.
It makes me think of a scene in Slay the Dragon where she's talking about the news is reporting that the 440,000 have been turned in, and that the army of women across Michigan are making this happen. And Katie even comments, like, do you remember back in the day when they were laughing that we were all just old ladies and we were never going to be able to do this? And it's just proof of, I mean, part of what we're fighting for on the progressive left here, as we look for where we fit in the establishment, is asking people to notice that the establishment will swallow us up just to silence us as well. And sometimes our fight, us throwing the punches, that's right. We should be the ones doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, I can tell you that there weren't a lot of people of color working on that campaign. There were a couple of women of color on the board, but one of the things that, and I'm just going to be honest and frank, and this is, it wasn't super traumatic for me, but it could have been for other organizers. But there was quite a bit of pressure from the volunteers, who were largely older white women, to, Joe, why aren't we gathering signatures, or why aren't we getting volunteers, specifically in Detroit, and then sometimes Flint. And the implication was that we needed to have, more black faces front and center, which is absolutely true. No one knew that more than me, the person of color organizer on this, and I'm Latino, but but still, that was something that I, would be confronted with. And my experience in organizing has always told me that the most important thing, because I'm from literally the other side of the state, but if I'm going to go to Detroit and I'm going to be wanting to organize with communities of color, again, we have to show that we're willing to do a whole heck of a lot of legwork, one, and two, we're not going to turn and burn. We're going to be a permanent force there. And this is, to bring this back to my first experience, my first understanding of this was that 2014 campaign. 2016, that loss, my heart was broken 2 times. It was broken because Donald Trump was elected president, and it was broken because what I had thought had happened in 2014 in my home state wasn't even close to true. There was no love for door knocking. There was no love for going out and doing the hard work in order to make sure we have good representation. And we all, face the consequences of those 11,000 votes.
boy, did we.
Well, and I think it's important, guys, to mention how quickly something like this can happen. You mentioned, Joe, that it was 2 days. And I can tell you that sometimes you don't even know where it's going to start. When I joined Twitter, it literally was, listeners, and Joe and Vince already knows this, to battle Donald Trump with everything I have, whether it's calling him out on his lies, whether it's calling out what is actually occurring behind the scenes, whether it's looking at the connections that my very helpful researchers like Justin Coleman, who was our previous guest, had put us onto about big money, foreign money, and the scandals that birthed. I amassed like 5,000 followers, and I thought, you know what? We need to do something with this. We need to take some action. We need to stop screaming into the void and start making change. And that is when life led me to you, Vince. So these things can happen, listeners. If you haven't already seen it, you've got to watch Slay the Dragon. You'll cheer, you'll cry. It will feel like this fight is your fight.
That's the beauty of being underestimated, is you get the element of surprise and you're able to really go forward. And so I guess the last little bit of advice is know what power, know your worth, know what power you have and know your worth, because every one of us can hit a lot harder than we think we can, especially when we have like super, super powerful forces and values like democracy behind.
That's incredible. So just to wrap up, Joe, because again, you're the professional on this. We've been telling our listeners, of course, take the Senate, of course, take the presidency, of course, expand the House. But what we've really keyed in on is these down ballot races at the state legislature. And if I'm requoting the movie correctly, please jump in if I'm not. That is where the gerrymandering battle is fought and either won or lost. Am I right?
No, that's absolutely right. I think that the most important legislative races in the country this year are 9 to 12 state house seats in Texas. I think that the Democrats, with the forces that are going on right now, absolutely have a capability of taking that state house and having a major say in how those districts are cut. And when we're talking about Texas, we're talking about a heck of a lot of seats. We're talking 5 to 10 U.S. House seats. And we're talking for a heck of a long time. We're talking about for the next 10 years at a minimum. And then, because, we're also cutting the state House seats again, and the demographics are going the right way, maybe that means that those are going to be locked in for, 2 or 3 generations, which is just, that's too much of an opportunity to let up. Those Texas seats are super important. And there's a few PACs that are doing some work there. And I'm not exactly sure which ones there are, but I do know that the Texas Democratic Party is going to be pushing hard for the House because they know there's blood in the water and they can make it happen.
One of our favorites, Julian Castro, is also really running the list on progressive endorsements and who to watch in those Texas races as well, if anybody's looking for resources on places to go to look for names or particular districts to volunteer in from afar. Joe, our listeners like to make small dollar donations. We assume, I've never actually followed up to see if anybody's donated, around the country. Where should we send a couple of bucks this week? Who's really deserving of it?
So I've got 2, and one's a personal act that I can talk about for a second. But the most important one is Katie Fahey's new organization is The People. It's thepeople.org, and they are focused on bridging the gap, specifically between the left and the right on the populist side stuff, and making sure that there are conversations that we can all have that move our country forward, that abandon some of the animosity. And this is just right up her alley, and I couldn't think of a more worthy national level organization to donate to. The other one is a local race, and that's there's quite a few I could pick. So I'm gonna pick one in Silicon Valley, and that's J.R. Fruin is running for city council in Silicon Valley there in Cupertino, where Apple is headquartered. And this is personal for me because the current person that he's running against, the incumbent, is also the mayor, and Stephen Scharf famously, if you want to look it up, said that we need to build a wall around Cupertino and make predominantly Latino San Jose pay for it. Just the culture of how housing is in the Bay Area, and Julian Castro can tell us way more than I can about this. But it's just that we need to make sure that the super wealthy communities like Cupertino are pulling their weight, doing their fair share, and it'll never happen with a guy who wants to lock it down and preserve it in amber, just the way Donald Trump says he's promising to do for the suburbs moving forward.
Well, I definitely know that we have some Bay Area and some NorCal listeners who can do more than just put $3 or $5 in, and could probably go put some feet in the street and knock some doors for that race as well. So get out there, everybody. Let's win it. Where do people get in touch with you? How do we learn a little bit more from you, Joe?
Best place to see the crazy stuff that I'm up to is on Twitter. That's my handle's beyond _ process there, and beyond _ process. I think, Vince, you caught it this morning. Had a real interesting time getting retweeted by the president of NARAL and then having Right to Life Michigan join the conversation after that.
That's awesome. Twitter is bringing together the best minds, you guys.
Thank you all so much. This is amazing experience, and I super appreciate what you're doing. The one thing I want to say about the podcast is I absolutely see the dynamic between you, Erin, and Vince there that was between Katie and I, and it's like a fastball special if there are any comic book fans out here. Just get the big guy launching the little dangerous one and get him nice and close and have them tear it up. It's awesome.
That means the world to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. That's incredible.
It was so much fun having you on the show too. I mean, I didn't want to get off the phone with you the other day when we were doing the pre-interview. I don't want to throw to a commercial break now and get you off the show either. But alas, I guess that we can't keep our listeners for hours and hours and hours. But we'll have you back again soon. I really hope.
Absolutely.
I hope so too.
All right, everybody, stay tucked in or hit that fast forward 30 seconds button twice, and we'll go through our endorsement list and accountability when we're back.
See you then.
President Obama nominated Pat Timmons-Goodson to the federal judiciary, but Mitch McConnell and Richard Burr blocked Obama's nomination, just like they did to Merrick Garland. McConnell didn't even give her a hearing. But when they go low, we go high. Now Pat Timmons-Goodson is running for Congress in North Carolina. Help us stun Mitch McConnell and flip this seat from red to blue.
Can you contribute $5, $10, whatever your budget will permit? We need you.
Welcome back to A Plan for That podcast. Boy, Vince, Joe Spalding was so inspiring when we heard him talk about voters, not politicians, and Katie's movement to end gerrymandering in Michigan State, where we can all agree that gerrymandering has been the devil that you know. It made me feel like anything is possible. And to that effect, what should we do? Let's get to work, Vince. Come on. Let's hold each other accountable like we do every week.
My accountability this week is a little bit of a different one. We're starting to see a lot of the policies being implemented and being proposed and being voted on that were drafted out of the summer of the protest here in Denver, specifically with city councils in Aurora and in Denver. In Aurora, Colorado, last night decided to ban the use of ketamine by their fire department. Ketamine was the drug cocktail that was used by the Aurora Police Department and other first responders while murdering Elijah McClain. And so they're starting to pull those out, and at the same time over in Denver, just a couple of miles away, we were having a budget meeting about whether or not we were going to be offering pay raises or salary cuts or what to our police department. And so there's just all of these conversations where the policy that's coming out of action is starting to hit the ground. And this week, all I did was sit on the digital channels and go out in person with some of our city's most wonderful organizers and just make sure people were paying attention to that. We're trying to find ways to make watching city council fun. There's a couple of local activists who are hosting a show where they kind of pop up video, talk over the council meeting the entire time, and it's a very entertaining way to watch it. But finding ways to make local politics fun and making sure that I'm staying involved in it is really how I kept myself busy last week. How about you?
So I actually want the link to that because it sounds like, and here I'm going to show how old I am, but it sounds like Mystery Science Theater 3000 or whatever it was called. Where there,
It does sound like it is. It makes me feel like that. I was watching an appropriations meeting actually this afternoon. What a dork I am. And I was DMing the host. I was like, this is literally the only way that I'm going to watch the legislative process from now on. Like, can you please do this over House votes too?
Oh,
It is
seriously.
so great.
I can't wait.
It is Coach MK and Carrie Joy here in Denver who are doing those for listeners who are interested in searching it out. I'll definitely put the link out on my Twitter at VinnyChan and on Plan for That Twitter at Plan for That podcast.
And I'll be sure to amplify that sucker like crazy at wellness for the number 4 you, the number 13 at wellness for you 13. Yes, that's my militant Twitter account. And for those of you who are offended, I apologize, but I'm not slowing down and I'm not shutting up.
Well, what really builds wellness better than an army of progressives and really good progressive policy being pushed forward? That's wellness to me.
Exactly. Wellness for the country. We'll get back to massage when it's safe, but right now it's wellness for the country.
Wellness for the soul. Where were you this week? I'm sure that you were making phone calls for somebody cool, and I'm also sure that you were making those phone calls for somebody not in your state. If I am starting to pick up on your MO.
Yes, that's correct. So Illinois is a bright blue state. And so I am trying, as a lot of volunteers are trying, to help deep red states or states that are turning purple these days go bright blue, just like we are here in Illinois. I've been making calls for Pat Timmons Goodson. I've also made a few calls for Jamie Harrison, who is running for Senate against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. Boo. I've also been texting, as I continue to be texting, for Reverend Raphael Warnock, who's running in a special election for Senate seat in Georgia against Kelly Loeffler, who won my disdain for her when she decided to be an insider trading profiteer on the COVID scandal that everybody already knew about, but lied to their constituents. Go her. She continues to earn my enmity by downplaying the Black Lives Matter movement and going so far as to tell the players on her Georgia State basketball team that they must never wear Black Lives Matter t-shirts. She doesn't just announce her racism, she parrots it loudly.
I like that you slipped anonymity. What is the adjective that she is evoking in you? Because it is a vocabulary word this week, everybody.
Awesome. Enmity, the process of making herself my enemy. My enemies list is long, but thank God my followers list is longer. And we are ready to bring progressive change in America, Vince. We are so ready. Everybody who saw Michelle Wu come out in her run for mayor. We're super excited. Please donate to Michelle Wu. We need to help her get elected as mayor. If you haven't already checked out her video, we are going to make it fill your timeline as soon as the show's over.
We definitely are. And you know what? I'm going to piggyback. If that is going to be Erin's endorsement for this week, I am also going to fully endorse Michelle Wu over in Boston. We need a really smart, wonderful, new progressive voice leading that very historic city. And she is definitely up for the challenge. Erin, I love that we both spend our weeks before we get on this mic as voters talking to voters, out in the world talking to voters. There's just something really wonderful about us both being volunteers, neither of us being campaign staffers or really big politicos. I have a day job that I am ignoring right now, everybody. So you know that I am a volunteer when I do this. And talking to voters really helps me instill a lot of my hope. I kind of pull and borrow their energy as I bring it into the week. But I've never really checked in with you on how your calls go. How were your calls this week? How was it talking to people around the country?
So the calls sometimes are short and sweet. People want to get off the phone. But where I did have a lot of interaction, believe it or not, was on texting. And I thought about this long and hard, and I think, listeners, this is because there's an anonymity and they don't feel pressured to say or do what they think could be the right or wrong thing with you on the phone. And they can say and feel free to say whatever they want to in a text. There's a couple I want to highlight. The first one Vince knows very well about because I brought it up in our pre-show check-in call that was more like therapy for me this week, where a voter had said to me in these exact words, and listeners, if you are this voter, please hear my reply to you, as the campaign only allows us to say certain things, and this is what I would have wanted to say to you. Ooh. So the reply from the texter was, "Nothing matters, nothing will change, everything is getting worse every day. I don't think anyone can fix it, and both parties are corrupt." My reply per the campaign was to hear them and acknowledge their concern. My reply on the show, where I can say what I wish, is, if you truly believe that, how does doing nothing change anything? Please. I understand your feelings. I understand the apathy temptation, but more apathy and more checking out will lead to bigger problems. We heard Barack Obama, one of my favorite presidents, say, democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to participate. You have to do something to create the democracy that you want. And that would have been my reply. Another person just broke my heart and said that her country clearly doesn't care about her. People of color are being murdered on a daily basis. No one seems to be able to stop it, and the only replies that we get from our electeds are outraged messages and pass it on tweets. Yes, I feel you. I understand exactly how you're feeling right now. And I'm going to echo what I did say back in my reply, because the campaign gave me a free reply go ahead. Okay. And that was to say to her, you can't be more wrong about the people who live in this country. I care about you. I am an ally, and I am followed by millions of others. Please join with us and use your voice to right the wrongs by putting people in power who will stand up to these injustices. So there you go. It was a big week, Vince.
That was a good response to the second texter who was feeling ostracized and isolated, and I know I'm not a person of color, and so I definitely can't discuss that experience, but it is definitely something that I'm hearing echoed around communities of color that I do listen to, is that idea that the country doesn't care about them. And your response was right. There are allies, there are people we do care and we do love. And a wonderful illustration of it in 30 seconds or less was an action in Adams County, Colorado this weekend, where students in predominantly white districts organized a Black Lives Matter protest that was intimidated and antagonized by some far-right extremists from northern Colorado. And then a group called Caravans for Justice. They're a group that, Google them, they're wonderful, you'll love them. They came in and said, hey, students, don't cancel your protest, don't run away scared. We're not going to take it over by any means, but we're going to organize a wall around you so that you can feel heard and so that you can talk. And the action was a rally. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't some crazy scene. It was children talking into a microphone about what it's like to be one of 14 Black students in a high school of over 1,000. A 17-year-old senior shared what it was like in her all-white history class to have the teacher mention slavery and have every eye always turn and look directly at her. But these are important stories that need to be told and need to be heard. And it was wonderful to see so many people show up to guard the exteriors of this rally, to protect these students from white nationalist extremists who did show up with their giant trucks and rolling coal in children's faces and screaming obscenities and just horrible, vulgar hate speech. But luckily, with umbrellas and some noisemakers, we were able to separate them out enough from the event that the students were able to to still have it, because we do care. People do care, and there are more people who give a shit, and there are more people who are getting into this fight every day than there are people who are fighting on the other side. I truly believe that.
That's exactly right, Vince. And I'm so glad you shared that story for everybody, because it's so important to know that not only are actions still happening on the ground, even though our corporate media refuses to air it, it's also important to know what Vince just said. There's more of us. There's more of us who are the real America, who are fighting for equality and justice, and for everyone to have a shot at the American dream. Just like Elizabeth Warren said, we're leveling the playing field, and it has to happen. And if it takes electing an army full of progressives, that's exactly what we're going to do.
This is so exactly what we're going to do. And for your first texter, the nihilist who sees no hope left in anything and no point in doing anything, I have a 2-point, it's two very important things. You mentioned one of them at the very top of the show, and that is, everybody take a very real mental health check. Like, this is hard. This has been years. For some of us, it's been decades. For some of us, it's been even longer. And it has been culminating in a lot of chaos over the last couple of years, and it's hard. Give yourself permission to unplug for a little bit. Not all of it, but a little bit. Give yourself permission to check in and pursue resources if you really, truly are feeling no hope left, because there is hope in this world. I promise you. And once you start putting one foot in front of the other, and once you start taking actionable steps, and once you start building coalitions and getting involved in your community, you'll find that hope, because it's alive in your neighbors around you.
My gosh, Vince, that was so beautiful. I was sitting here as I was listening to that inspired message, just thinking, I don't know, is this going to be a call-in show? Because I feel like that could really be a thing.
That would be so much fun. So, you know what? No, we'll get to that later. A call-in show would be so much. Let's do a Twitter DM sometimes, though. It'd be so great to talk to y'all on our. Erin and I are both very active on at Plan for That podcast on Twitter, and we would love to just hear from you and be able to bounce back and forth off mic more regularly with all of our listeners and have these conversations. Let's check in with each other. Let's be this community for ourselves. We're Team Warren. We're Team A Plan for That. We are our army of progressives, and we're promised big structural funds. Let's make sure that we have it.
I am super excited, Vince. Everything that you and Joe have said to me just makes me even more welcoming to the people that we have coming next week, called Toledo Persists. This is a couple of ladies who just like me, and probably many of you out there, have just had it. They have just had enough. They can't stand Trump. They hate everything he stands for. And they've taken their fire. They've turned it into a grassroots community activist group. This group is not just passing out flyers and getting active in the community. They're also having fun while doing it, which, as you pointed out in our earlier episodes, and as I want to continue to reiterate, no one's going to want to talk politics with you if you're always angry and militant. We've got to create some fun out there too. And these ladies have had that, and they've accomplished it. And I can't wait for them to tell us exactly how it grew, and so that we can replicate it all across the nation.
You know, I have big hopes for this show. I truly believe that it can be an important tool inside of the tool chest to help people organize, to help people actualize, to help people really join the fight. But I have to be honest, I really love doing this. I am so looking forward to this conversation and to hearing from more inspiring people who saw change, or saw where change needed to happen, and just made a way, forced their way through, and got involved in the process to make it happen. This is a special treat just for me, it feels like sometimes, or just for us, it feels like sometimes.
I hear you, Vince. I want to reiterate what I said in our break. This is my rainbow today. This is what I need. This is what I've loved. And this is the energy that I'm going to bring forth back onto social media. So watch out, doom and gloomers. I'm coming at you with positivity.
It's gonna happen, everybody. You can find us online at Plan for That Podcast on Twitter. I am at Vinny Chant on Twitter and Instagram. And you know what? I'll even plug a Facebook. I'm at Producer Vince on Facebook.
Awesome, Vince. I hope everyone follows him because he's super fun. It's not just all about podcasting. He's a cool guy, too.
Everybody find Erin as well, because, I mean, there's a reason that she doubles me in followers on every platform that we compete on. It is because she is the better of the two voices, for sure. It is always so great to talk to you every week and to talk with everybody that's listening. This is my rainbow as well. Thank you, everybody. I can't wait till next week.
Hear, hear. Let's go elect an army of progressives.